Hello, everyone. This is Alan MacLeod from MintPress News here, and today we're going to be talking about Bill Gates, everybody's favorite billionaire, and specifically about how Bill Gates has donated over $300 million to big media outlets across the world, including CNN, PBS, NPR, the Financial Times, and the New York Times. It's hard times right now for Bill. He's only the fourth richest individual in the world right now. The last time he was the world's number one was in December 2019. But in the past couple of years, things have not been going his way, and his wealth has climbed to just a piddling $124 billion, according to the Forbes Rich List. Nevertheless, we can at least take solace in the fact that he still gets largely positive media coverage, at least until the time when his wife Melinda started leaking juicy info to the press about his connections to the disgraced trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. Let's take a look at some of that super positive coverage I was talking about there. Let's share the screen. This is from the BBC, Bill Gates, philanthropist. Or we could move over to NPR, why Bill Gates thinks ending polio is worth it. Wow, what a guy. Or we'll go over to The Guardian, how Bill Gates aims to clean up the planet. Wow, this guy is a renaissance man. He's doing absolutely everything he can for us. He's a titan of industry and a wonderful guy. At least that's what it seems like in a lot of the press. Here's another one. This is from NBC, I think. What Einstein and Bill Gates teach us about time travel. Wow, I didn't know he knew anything about that as well. Back to NPR again. Bill Gates and other billionaires pledge to take on climate change. There's a lot of stuff about how Bill Gates is giving away so much money, and they never seem to rattle with the fact that he just keeps on getting richer and richer. You'd think if he was giving all his money away, he would be getting poorer, but that doesn't seem to come into their heads too much. Bill Gates gives $4.6 billion to charity, and biggest donation since 2000. Wow, what a great guy. And we'll finish on Al-Jazeera here. Bill Gates on ending disease, saving lives. Time is on our side. So you can see they're almost literally presenting him as a saint. That would be, just crazy, like he's, Francis of Assisi or something. Oh no, wait, they actually did do that. Here is The Guardian. It's an old article, but as you can see from the title there, it's called literally Saint Bill. And if we go down, this article is really, really something else. A new era of philanthropy has dawned, according to the writer Rory Carroll, who I've got a little bit of previous expertise with. It goes on. Carroll obviously interviewed Bill and specifically his wife Melinda here, and it's pretty interesting the way they're both presented in this. Here's a nice little choice paragraph here. The couple are constantly asked why. Why give away their money? To soften an image battered by federal antitrust suits, say some. To avail of tax breaks, say others. The truth, says Melinda, has more to do with family tradition. So that's great there. They're giving away billions out of the goodness of their hearts. And of course, stop talking all about that, tax break stuff and all the nonsense about PR. We're doing it for, the good of humanity, really. And that's really what Melinda talks about in this article. This is what she says here. We were thinking a lot about how Bill and his dad would start working together now. Was there something they could do together that they were both passionate about? And philanthropy, giving something back, was something that his mum believed deeply in. Encouraged by her own parents, the young Melinda was also predisposed to philanthropy, volunteering for community service at her local hospital, school, and courthouse. Wow. For me personally, she says, there is a little bit of religious focus in philanthropy. Wow, what a couple. It's just, just incredible how they, doing this out of the good of their own hearts. The only downside to this, says The Guardian here, you can read this part. This is really the part that got me thinking I have to speak about this. One small downside to the couple's do-gooding crusade, a do-gooding crusade, wow, is the official functions. It's uncomfortable when you go into a room and people are thanking you all the time for what you've done. I mean, this is just incredible. I mean, how righteous do you get? This is literally how they see themselves. It's so hard being saints. Jesus Christ, Mother Teresa, Bill Gates, they think of themselves not as parasites who are stealing billions from the rest of us, but almost like Nietzschean supermen, beings of pure goodness and wisdom. Let's actually watch a little clip from CNN now. I'm going to share my screen again. And this clip is with Fareed Zakaria. For some reason, CNN are very, very here we go. For some reason, CNN and other corporate media are very, very interested in Bill Gates's ideas about socialism and other types of economic systems, which, might change things. Let's see what he's got to say about socialism here.
This kind of thing happening.
Well, it's not the 1930s where the system has really failed to provide adequate services, and therefore a lot of people are flirting with fairly dramatic changes, what used to be called socialism in the narrow sense. These are good debates. Should companies be able to compete states against each other, get these subsidies? I sort of think not. But hey, that's a separate issue. That's not an attack on capitalism. Capitalism has hundreds of parameters that you can change, like the estate tax, the capital gains tax, and it's still capitalism. As long as you have market-based pricing, you let people create new companies very easily. If you think there's a lack of competition in some place, you come in and intervene on that. Part of the reason I think people should say, okay, some things are going well overall, is that flirting with radical change, dramatic change to how we run these systems, I personally, my vote will be not to make a radical change. Now you can say I'm biased because this system has worked very well for me, and I feel I plead guilty to that. But as I look overall at the capitalist economies, there are a lot of good things doing, and I think you can tune the tax parameters and get way more equity and get some additional government services and still be in the same basic framework.
Okay, so that's formerly world's richest man, Bill Gates, giving his opinion about socialism. You will be amazed to find out that he's against it. Stop the presses. Look at CNN's headline in this. Gates, I don't want to see radical changes to the US. Wow, I wonder why he might not want to see radical changes. Maybe it's because he sleeps on a mountain of gold coins like Scrooge McDuck and has absolutely everything he wants. But the fact that corporate media just keep going back to him to ask his opinions on every matter, most of which he is completely unqualified for, is frankly embarrassing. And that takes us to what I want to really talk about today, and that is how Bill Gates subsidizes media. Now, what if I told you that every single news outlet that I've shown you so far, all of these headlines, what if I told you that absolutely all of them have actually taken millions of dollars, and in some cases tens of millions of dollars, in funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? Do you think that sponsorship might color their opinions of Gates? Let's go to an article I wrote for MintPress a couple of months ago here. It's called, you can find it at MintPress News, of course, it's called Revealed. Documents show Bill Gates has given $319 million to media outlets. And sifting through over 30,000 grants, in the company's database, MintPress can reveal that the Gates Foundation has bankrolled hundreds of media outlets and ventures to the tune of at least $319 million. And so Gates and his wife have actually been funneling money to a significant portion of the entire corporate media landscape. And I'm just going to quickly go through some of the names that I found who have taken considerable amounts of cash from Gates. Top of the list is National Public Radio, NPR. They've accepted nearly $25 million from Gates and his foundation, as you can see there. Second on the list is The Guardian. We've also got pretty big outlets like The Conversation, Der Spiegel, a very important German newspaper, NBC Universal, Le Monde, probably France's most important newspaper. The BBC has taken $3.67 million from Gates. Just behind them is CNN, $3.6 million for them. The Daily Telegraph, Upworthy, the Financial Times, The Atlantic, Medium.com, Al Jazeera has also accepted $1 million from Gates. And there's also others like PBS and Gannett. And you should go through the list and just check if some of your favorite outlets have been taking money from him. Now, the Gates Foundation has also given nearly $63 million to charities closely associated with big media outlets. For example, $53 million went to the BBC's Media Action charity. Over $9 million has gone to MTV's Staying Alive Foundation. And $1 million was given to the New York Times Neediest Causes Fund. Now, while these are not specifically funding journalism, donations to the philanthropic arm of journalistic outlets should still be noted. You know, it's a bit like bankrolling politicians. Sometimes they say, well, he only gave to my charitable foundation. He wasn't actually funding my campaign. But of course, if you're giving millions to, let's just pick a name at random, the Clinton Foundation, that is, more or less giving to the candidate, because while they might not use that specifically for running for office, that will allow them to take resources away from that particular endeavor and put them into another one. Or, to put it another way, if somebody just came up and gave me or you $500,000 to fund your medical treatment, for example, that's almost the same as giving it to you. No questions asked. Now, where does all this money go? What does it go into? What sort of reporting? Well, the money is generally directed towards issues that are very close to the Gates' hearts. For example, $3.6 million went to CNN, and that was, in their own words, to report on gender equality with a particular focus on least developed countries, producing journalism on the everyday inequalities endured by women and girls around the world. Meanwhile, the Texas Tribune accepted millions to, quote, increase public awareness and engagement of education reform issues in Texas. Now, some people who know a bit about Gates will know that he is one of the biggest advocates of the charter school movement, which is a movement that's really gaining steam across the United States. If you don't know what charter school movements are, I guess the sort of post-it note definition would be to take state schools and to start to run them like a business, almost privatizing them in a sense. Now, schools, at the risk of stating the obvious, they are not businesses and they should not be run as such. They should not be making profits. If you run a school like a business, what do you do first? Well, one thing you could do, and this has happened, is you fire all the unionized teachers and then you bring the ones back who you want to keep at a reduced salary and reduced benefits. That, of course, helps your bottom line, but does it really help the children? And frankly, is this obsession with test scores really helping kids? Sure, you can blast them with math and English classes for months, and you might be able to get a significant benefit in terms of test scores on some test that you made up. But is that actually really developing their critical thinking skills and modeling them for a life in society where they should be independent and healthy and smart and people who can really contribute to society in a meaningful way? I would argue no. And in fact, a lot of teachers' unions say the same. And that's why the majority of them are very much against charter schools, despite the fact that, as I said, there's a lot of big money behind the movement. Ultimately, they see this as a sort of soft privatization of American education. And as I said, we'll talk about gender and environment, and in particular public health, later. But let's get back to that list I was showing you before. Gates has also been very active in funding journalism centers as well. These are not exactly media outlets, but they do employ a lot of journalists to do investigative reporting on a number of issues. You can see that he has given, according to my findings, just over $38 million, a lot of which has gone into the DC-based International Center for Journalists, which employs a heck of a lot of people. Another area in which Gates has been active is funding press foundations. You can see some of them on your screen right now. For instance, the Gates Foundation, plies press and journalism associations with cash. For example, one is the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which represents around 100 newspapers in the United States. They've accepted over $3.2 million from Gates. And another thing Gates does is actually give money to universities, specifically to train journalists, often in areas which he's most interested in, which tend to be things like the environment, education, and health. That's the list of universities that have directly received money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. A lot of them are very well known. You can see top of the list is Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, 1.9 million or thereabouts they've accepted. There's a lot of big names on that list as well. Columbia University, the very prestigious New York institution, University of California, Berkeley. They've also accepted $767,000. Seattle University, the Institute for Advanced Journalism Studies. There's a lot of names on that list, and I'm sure some of you have even attended those ones and maybe not even realized that Gates has been underwriting a lot of the programs there. That means, in short, that today it is actually possible for an individual to train as a reporter thanks to a grant from the Gates Foundation, then find work at a Gates-funded outlet, like the ones we've just been talking about, and then belong to a press association, which is also funded by Gates. And this is especially true for journalists working in the fields of education and health and certain topics that are particularly, areas of focus for Bill and his wife, Melinda. And that's a real problem, right? Because journalists are really the ones who are supposed to be scrutinizing the powerful, and they honestly don't come more powerful than Bill Gates. None of this means that the outlets that I have been highlighting, or the universities or the associations that receive Gates money, are irredeemably corrupt. I'm not trying to cancel them. I'm not saying, don't read them or don't go there. And I'm not saying either that the Gates Foundation hasn't done any good in the world as well. But what I do want to really highlight is that this is a glaring conflict of interest in the world of media, whereby the very institutions that we rely on to hold the powerful to account are quietly being funded by him. He's literally one of the richest and most powerful people to have ever lived. And yet we are relying on media to shine a light on power and hold them to account. But, that's a huge conflict of interest when you're being charged with, reporting on something Gates is doing while you're actually being funded by him. Ask yourself, if Bill Gates gave you $24 million like he did to NPR, do you think that would cloud your judgment of him? I think it might. And I want to show you something now. I'm going to share my screen again. So this is actually a really good article from the Seattle Times, which is Bill Gates' local paper. He is a Seattle native. And it's called "Does Gates' Funding of Media Taint Objectivity?" And the subheadline goes, "Better known for its battles against global disease, the Gates Foundation has also become a force in journalism. The foundation's contributions to non-profit and for-profit media have helped spur coverage of global health, development, and education issues. But some people worry that its growing support of media organizations blurs the line between journalism and advocacy." And I think I quite agree. It goes on to say later in the article that the foundation's grants to media organizations raise obvious conflict of interest questions. How can reporting be unbiased when a major player holds the purse strings? And yeah, this is a really good article, but I will draw your attention to something. When it was published, February 2011. Now, why is that important? Because that was before the Seattle Times accepted large amounts of money from Gates himself to fund their education pages. This is the Seattle Times Education Lab here. As you can read about the Education Lab, the Seattle Foundation serves as the fiscal sponsor for Education Lab, which is supported by grants from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, also from Amazon as well. Now, I haven't been able to find any more articles like this in the Seattle Times since they accepted the funding from Gates. I'm not saying that Gates has essentially bought the Seattle Times silence, but what I am saying is that this is really not a good look for journalism. And maybe even subconsciously, this is the sort of thing that really clouds corporate media today. You know, when we talk about bias in media, we often think about government-sponsored media like the BBC or RT or Al Jazeera. But frankly, a lot of the time, their biases are much more obvious. The government controls them, the government sponsors them, they're going to represent their government's take on the news. But when we're talking about corporate media, like the New York Times, CNN, Fox, etc., most of the media that are big players out there, they are quietly being sponsored by hundreds of different big corporations who are funding them to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, maybe even tens of millions of dollars per corporation. And that introduces an enormous amount of conflict of interest that we really don't see and don't think about very much. And furthermore, when you look on the boards of these big companies, these big press associations, or outlets like CNN or Fox or whomever, you see a lot of people who are also on the board of big corporations or big bodies or big lobbies. And that again introduces all sorts of distortions and conflicts of interest that we don't even think about often. Now, unlike other high-profile billionaires, like, for instance, Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, or Pierre Omidyar, who started The Intercept, Gates does his business in the media a little bit differently, and most people don't really associate him with the corporate press. But actually, Gates and his companies that he's associated with, specifically Microsoft, have amassed considerable influence in the media. We already rely on Microsoft-owned products for communication, like Skype or Hotmail, or social media, like LinkedIn, which is owned by Microsoft, or even entertainment, like the Xbox. And furthermore, the hardware and software we use to communicate with each other is often owned by Microsoft. How many of us, for instance, are watching this on a Microsoft Surface or Windows Phone, or even through Windows OS? I would imagine it's probably most of us. Microsoft, unbeknownst to a lot of people, also owns stakes in media giants like Comcast and AT&T. And of course, the MS in MSNBC stands for Microsoft. It was originally a Microsoft venture. Now, Gates is only a part owner of Microsoft, of course, nowadays, but he is still an influential player in the business. So, I also want to make clear that this $319 million figure that I quoted you before is the absolute floor of what it could be. And that's because the study was, hamstrung in a lot of ways. I went through probably tens of thousands of grants on that database, and it took days and days of work. But the figure does not count subgrants, which is money given by the recipients to media organizations around the world. And while the Gates Foundation does try to foster an air of openness about itself, there is actually precious little data publicly about what happens to the money for each grant. Only donations to media outlets and press organizations themselves, or projects that could be identified from the information on Gates's own website, were counted, meaning that thousands of grants, probably having some sort of media element, do not appear on this list. And the information we have about them is basically one or two sentences written by somebody from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation itself. I'll give you one example of this. A case in point here is the Gates Foundation partnership with Viacom CBS, which is one of the big giants in the media industry. Obviously, the grant, of course, counted for something like 6 million. And of course, Viacom CBS, I should just say, owns, of course, CBS News, MTV, it owns VH1, Nickelodeon, BET, a ton of popular news channels or entertainment channels. Media reports at the time about this $6 million deal with Viacom CBS noted that the Gates Foundation was paying the entertainment giant to insert information and public service broadcasts into its programming, and noting that Gates had actually personally intervened to change storylines in big shows like ER or Law and Order SVU. But when you go to the Gates Foundation website, Viacom and CBS are nowhere to be found. And that's likely because the grant in question, which I said totals about $6 million, merely describes the project as a public engagement campaign aimed at improving high school graduation rates and post-secondary completion rates, specifically aimed at parents and students. So that means that that was not included in the $319 million figure. Of course, as well, Gates funds a lot of academic studies, which end up being the source of a lot of journalistic stories. So, an academic writes a paper or a book, and their findings get written up by the media, and then that influences the public debate, of course. And none of that was none of that was included in that $319 million figure. So you might say, well, okay, it's not perfect that a billionaire funding the media, that's our model, but isn't Gates a well-meaning guy? Isn't he like this lovable dork who does good in the world? Isn't he leading the fight in, against diseases and poverty all around the place? Well, I would say that one reason his name has such cachet, unfortunately, is that media are not doing their job and accurately reporting on a lot of his most controversial endeavors. One of which I'm going to show you now. I wrote this article for MintPress News a couple of months ago. In fact, I think it was over a year ago now. Yeah, January 2021. It's called "Poor Nations Left Reeling After Bill Gates Advised Oxford to Ditch Open Source COVID Vaccine." Now, what's this about? The University of Oxford is a very prestigious British public university, and this vaccine that they developed, their scientists, was done almost entirely with public money. And it's a very cheap and effective COVID vaccine. The university publicly announced that they were going to make the intellectual property from the vaccine completely free or very cheap to use globally, which meant that any country or company with the capability to make these vaccines could copy their data and get people jabbed for as little as $3 to $4 each, which is how much it costs to manufacture according to Oxford. The world, when we heard this, was incredibly relieved. It felt like there was light at the end of the tunnel and everybody would get jabbed. Um, the way it was developed as well, just on a tangent, is a complete repudiation about that capitalist myth about how we need patents to spur innovation, and without them we'll never get anywhere because we won't have the get up and go to actually do something if people are just going to copy us. We're just completely self-interested and only think about money. But here, there was a publicly funded vaccine project done by scientists who were making normal wages and doing something purely for the good of others and giving it away, their extraordinarily important research, for free. But Gates didn't like this. Gates, his fortune is pretty much completely derived from artificial scarcity and the patent protection laws, which stop people using copyable products for free. I'm specifically here talking about Microsoft software like Microsoft Word. He rushed into action and furiously called everyone he knew at Oxford University, which, as I'll detail, is quite a lot of people, to try to change this and to try to get them to immediately sign an exclusive deal with a private pharmaceutical company and block this Creative Commons use of the product. As I quote here, Kaiser Health News had a good article about it and said, this is a direct quote from Gates. He said, he went to Oxford University and said, hey, you're doing brilliant work, but you really need to team up. That's what Gates said here, meaning specifically you need to team up with a big pharma company. Now, you might not even know what vaccine I'm talking about because it's rarely even referred to as the Oxford vaccine anymore. I'm talking about the AstraZeneca vaccine. And unfortunately, as soon as Oxford partnered with AstraZeneca, there were major problems. And that's because one company simply didn't have anything like the capability needed to produce these vaccines. So AstraZeneca immediately fell tens of millions of vaccines short of even their base orders, which they'd been given before they'd even proven the concept. Why did Oxford University listen to Gates in the first place? Well, Bill Gates is one of Oxford's primary funders, and his foundation has given Oxford tens of millions of dollars in recent research grants, according to his own website. Now, I would imagine that, this is at least one fact, one, cromulent fact in deciding why Oxford University picked up that phone in the first place. If you or I try to phone them up, we're not going to get through because we don't have the right contacts there. And even if we did, they wouldn't take our call. But when Bill Gates phones up and he holds the purse strings, you better listen. I wonder what he said on that phone call. Just complete speculation. Do you think, what did he say to get them to completely change course on a dime and do exactly the opposite, which is what he wanted? Did he, for instance, threaten to pull tens of millions of dollars in funding for the future from that university? I've got no evidence of that, but, it's possible, isn't it? Now, the consequences of this action, Gates's actions, are really immeasurable. AstraZeneca, as I said, fell behind schedule. And even today, as I'm speaking, there's no real vaccine that everybody can get all around the world. For example, the vast majority of people in the global south still have not had access to any vaccines. And worldwide, it's only just over 50% right now who've even had a booster. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, for instance, which is sub-Saharan Africa's largest country, only 0.4% of the population have actually been immunized against COVID-19. So I'll ask you, how many people do you think died because of this? Is it thousands? Is it hundreds of thousands? Is it even millions? There's really no way of finding out, but I am sure the number is rather large. One last thing I'll say about this story is that it was actually suppressed by Google, despite the fact it was doing really well. Google pulled its ads from it, meaning that MintPress probably actually lost money by covering this story. I actually spoke to the people at Google. If you tell them that you're a journalist and you're writing a story featuring them, they will be, in my experience, they will be very anxious to get back to you and talk to you and try and, help you along your way. They'll be very insistent that if they can provide anything, and they very much want to know the line you're taking as well. I spoke to them, and off the record, they did say that, well, it's probably because some of the comments sparked certain, certain algorithms that just did a sort of automatic ban of advertisements on that. Now, I can understand that if you write Bill Gates and vaccine into a title of an article, you're probably going to get a lot of kind of unhinged comments and a lot of people, descending into slugging matches in the comments, calling each other, whatever. For whatever reason, Bill Gates does appear to be something of a lightning rod with people all around the world. There's just something about them that they don't like. It's a little bit like, who's the other guy? George Soros is another one like that. There's all sorts of wild conspiracy theories out there online. And frankly, I think a lot of them are just wastes of time. And not only that, they also dissuade people from looking into these people's real backgrounds and, actually challenging them on things that need to be challenged, rather than, talking about some sort of insane conspiracy theory about how they're secretly controlling the world all by themselves. Now, the upshot of this is that even in alternative media, we're really dissuaded from covering topics like this, as it hurts us financially. And you'd better believe if you're in corporate media and the Gates Foundation is giving you millions of dollars, I think even subconsciously, there's probably an element of doubt in journalists and editors' mind when it comes to publishing stories like this. I've no doubt that this video that you're watching right now will be demonetized on YouTube as well. So if you do want to see more content like this, and you are in a financial position to do so, why not support MintPress on Patreon or GoFundMe or another sponsorship platform? I'm sure there'll be a link down below in the info box wherever you're watching this. If not, go to mintpressnews.com, and just after you've bookmarked it, there'll probably be a link over there which you can click. If you're not in a financial position to help us monetarily, that's fine. You can still help us in other ways by sharing our content or signing up for our free Telegram, or even just giving us a like here on whatever platform you're watching on. Donations do go a long way here, because it should go without saying that we are not funded by Bill Gates and his billions, which frankly is a lot more that can be said than other outlets in corporate media.